Good afternoon and welcome to our Raleigh City Council budget work session this afternoon. Mayor Baldwin should be here momentarily, but she wanted us to go ahead and get started. We are going to be discussing our enterprise funds, and I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Mary Vigue.
Thank you, members of council, for being here with us this afternoon. At our March work session today, we are going to cover our enterprise funds. There are a couple key decision points that we'll look to council for some direction as we look at our 22 budget. We'll begin the afternoon with our Raleigh Water Enterprise, and Robert Massengill is here to provide us with an overview.
All right, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Thank you for having me today to present our FY22 budget. Put me in, there you go. Okay, this is our agenda for today. We'll talk about the impacts of and our responses to COVID-19, including our customer assistance and our outreach efforts. We'll go over some of our main cost drivers in both the operating and capital improvements budgets. We'll go over the utility rate model and provide a rate recommendation at the end. Since the pandemic hit our area, it's almost been exactly a year ago today, we've seen a shift in customer usage patterns with the big shift from non-residential to residential as schools were closed and as businesses were either closed or were shifting to teleworking at home. This has resulted in a slight decrease in total revenue, but it's within 1% of last year. We've seen a 36% decrease in late fee revenues since last March when we stopped severances, which is about $545,000. And development has not slowed down during the pandemic. Development fee revenue has increased by 16%, which is about $1.8 million. As you can imagine, though, the number of past due accounts has risen significantly, as well as the average past due amount per account, and I'll provide more information about that a little bit later. So some of our COVID responses: when the pandemic hit last March, we stopped severances for non-payment, we stopped charging late fees, and we reconnected previously disconnected customers. Once we saw the usage patterns shift from non-residential to residential after the first month of the pandemic, we raised the threshold between Tier 2 and Tier 3 of our water rates to provide relief to customers teleworking at home and helping their children with remote learning. However, we have seen the delinquency rate increase from 0.6% of our accounts to about 7% of our accounts since last March. The current total delinquent amount is about $9 million, which is about $5.5 million more than normal when we start our credit and collections process. In response, we've partnered with Wake County and others to provide funding assistance from the various assistance programs that I'll show you on the next slide. The pandemic also had a negative impact on the Raleigh Convention Center activities. Fortunately, we were able to bring 9 Convention Center staff members over to Raleigh Water specifically to reach out to past due customers by email and by phone to make them aware of funding assistance opportunities, to encourage them to apply for those opportunities, and to help them set up payment plans. This is a 4-way win for Raleigh Water, the Raleigh Convention Center, our employees, and our customers. Regarding payment plans, in a normal year, payment plans would typically be for 3 months. We're now offering up to 12-month payment plans to help keep the payment plans affordable. We expect to be able to recover the past due amounts through funding assistance programs and by developing manageable payment plans to help our customers dig out of debt. Between the city, the state, and the federal government, several customer assistance programs are in place. The Utility Customer Assistance Program, or UCAP, is funded with Raleigh General Fund revenue, currently at $200,000 a year. The towns of Garner and Rollsville also participate with their general fund revenue at $14,173 and $2,400 respectively. The eligibility mirrors the Federal Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, and only customers within the corporate limits of the participating municipalities are eligible for UCAP funding. Project Share is funding that comes from contributions from individual and corporate customers with the same eligibility requirements as UCAP, except customers throughout the entire service area are eligible for Project Share funding. Wake Helps is a CARES Act federally funded program administered by Wake County to assist customers with utility bills, including electric, gas, and the services on our utility bill for the entire county. So far, Wake County has provided over $388,000 in assistance to 1,382 of our customers. Also funded by the CARES Act, the North Carolina Housing Opportunities and Prevention of Evictions Program, or NC HOPES, is available to provide utility assistance as well. This program has just recently been set up, and so we're in the process of developing processes to facilitate data sharing with the state and to promote the program with our utility customers. And Raleigh was recently awarded about $14.3 million in emergency rental assistance funding to assist renters with past due rent and utility payments. That program is called House Wake. Wake County also received about $19.3 million for the same purpose. The county and the city have executed a three-party agreement with Telemon, Inc. to administer the program, which covers all of Raleigh Water service area. That program has also recently just been set up, so I don't have any numbers to share with you at this time. But we will continue to seek out other customer assistance programs as they become available, and we will follow up with updates in future managers' weekly update reports. We've also identified another potential funding source for additional customer assistance. We lease space on most of our elevated tanks to cellular providers, which generates about $355,000 a year. We've worked with the city attorney's office and bond counsel over the last several months to make sure it's okay to use that revenue to support a customer assistance program. And we've determined that it is. So we propose the funds be made eligible from the current fiscal year and future fiscal years, and to make customers throughout the entire service area eligible because the revenue is generated from elevated tanks throughout the service area, and our merger agreements require that we treat all customers equitably. I have placed this item on the agenda for tomorrow's City Council meeting for your approval. It includes a budget amendment to make the current fiscal year revenue available. We keep track of and visualize our data with dashboards. This dashboard tracks the total past due amount since last March when we stopped severances. The peaks represent the past due amounts when the bills are sent, and the valleys represent the past due amounts just before the next set of bills are sent. Please notice how the peaks and valleys increase until mid-January when we reinitiated late fees and our outreach team was successful helping customers with funding assistance and setting up payment plans. The peaks and valleys have since been trending down. And I realize the text is maybe too small for you to read in the upper right-hand corner, but the information block in that upper right-hand corner shows the current past due amount, which is about $9 million, as well as a breakdown by each customer class with that wide blue band representing single-family residential, which is about $7.2 million in arrears. We currently have about 12,500 customers in arrears, which is about 7% of our accounts, as I'd mentioned earlier, of which 10,000 are in Raleigh. And you can see how the distribution breaks down for the merger communities as well. This dashboard also shows how many customers have set up and maintained payment plans. The number of payment plans has increased significantly since we resumed credit and collections process in February, which includes severance as a final measure. We expect the number of payment plans several months. As a matter of fact, I've been monitoring just middle of last week, we only had about 23% of our customers set up on payment plans, and we're seeing those numbers go up very quickly. Okay, switching over to our operational budget. Our proposed FY22 budget this year is $262.2 million, with the primary cost drivers in the budget being the financing of the capital improvements program in the form of pay-go and debt service, which make up about 57% of the total budget, with the remainder primarily funding personnel in the form of salaries and retirement expenses, electrical costs to operate the treatment plants, and chemicals at our treatment plants and the collection system for corrosion and odor control. Our expenses are basically broken down into three buckets. Operating expenses, things like salaries, chemicals, electrical costs, are represented by the blue bars across the bottom. Debt service, which are our annual principal and interest payments on our debt, are represented by those green bars across the middle. And pay-go for capital projects represented by the gray bars across the top. We've worked hard over the last 12 years to manage our operating expenses, doing things like mapping our business processes, applying lean principles, leveraging technology, and implementing management systems. You may recall that we've implemented the Raleigh Utility Management System, or RUMS, throughout the department, which is helping us to continuously improve and be more efficient. The big change over time on this chart is pay-go funding for capital projects, primarily for asset management, which continues to be a big need. Pay-go has increased most significantly since 2014 when we started implementing the infrastructure replacement charges on the utility bill. Maintaining the financial metrics to obtain and retain our AAA bond ratings have also helped generate pay-go funding. Moving over to our FY22 capital improvements plan, the main cost driver for next year's are the asset management program, where we continue to focus on condition assessment, small and large diameter pipe replacements, and implementing asset management for our vertical assets, things like our treatment plants and our pump stations. Addressing the wet weather flows and structural condition in our large diameter sewer interceptors, like the West News interceptor, wastewater pump station improvements for rehab and replacement of existing pump stations, and to address growth in the eastern portion of the service area. Improvements at the E.M. Johnson Water Treatment Plant to rehab and upgrade the 53-year-old plant, and resource recovery improvements at Smith Creek facility in Wake Forest and the Neuse River facility associated with the bioenergy recovery project. Our 10-year capital improvements program is $1.67 billion. That's down from $1.76 last year. And this chart shows the breakdown of CIP in the major categories. Our asset management needs make up about a fourth of the CIP, spread fairly evenly over the entire 10 years. Addressing the capacity and condition of our large diameter sewer interceptors is an immediate need, with the majority of the funding in phase 1 to address issues that we already know about. Wastewater pump stations costs represent about 16% of the CIP, most of which is in year 5 of phase 1. The E.M. Johnson improvements almost entirely in phase 1, and the wastewater treatment improvements at Smith Creek and Neuse River facilities, most of which are in phase 1. We use a rate model to forecast revenues and expenditures each year. You should have a copy of the rate model in your packet. There's several assumptions in the rate model, some of which are shown here. Predicting actual revenues and expenditures is important in the model, so we align the utility rates with the actual cost to operate the utility. We start by looking at the first 6 months of actual revenues and expenditures in the current fiscal years, and we use that information in combination with the historical performance to project where we think FY21 will end up. In the rate model, we're assuming 1% growth in residential consumption, a 0.5% growth in non-residential consumption, and no growth in irrigation use from FY22 on. We assume 1.5% growth in the number of accounts, which is consistent with what we've experienced over the last few years, even during the pandemic. And we adjust these assumptions annually based on what happens each year. For example, if and when we start to see our consumption increase more rapidly, we can adjust the assumptions in the model accordingly. The model also assumes just under 3% rate increases to the average customer in the out years, and it meets our financial and debt policy goals beyond 2025. Those financial goals include maintaining a parity debt coverage ratio greater than 2 times and a year-ending fund balance greater than or equal to 100% of our operating expenses. And as a reminder, the debt coverage ratio is calculated by taking our total revenue, subtracting our operating expenses, and dividing that by our annual debt service. Meeting these financial goals has allowed us to achieve and maintain AAA credit ratings from all 3 rating agencies, which gives us access to the lowest interest rates. The purpose of maintaining 100% fund balance is to provide funding during catastrophic events and during times of uncertainty, like during a pandemic. Things like cash funding about 50% of our capital project also provides flexibility to slow some projects to free up funds to support operational needs if necessary. You may recall that we did not implement a rate increase last year. This year, we need a minor adjustment to avoid larger increases down the road and in the out years. So I do have a rate recommendation for you this year. The recommendation is to apply 1.5% increase to the base and volumetric water and sewer charges on the utility bill, with no adjustments to the infrastructure or watershed charges. This results in a 1.33% or 77 cents per month increase to our average residential customer. And this chart shows what that would look like. Okay. This chart shows some important information from the rate model. The numbers on the left-hand column of the chart indicate the line on the rate model that you have in your packet. The top 2 rows show the monthly bill amounts for the average customer with the proposed increase, 1.33% this year, and the future proposed rate increases. Please note that less than 3% increases are forecasted in the out years, and those are those blue numbers. The bottom 2 rows show the results on our financial goals, debt coverage ratio, and fund balance, both of which are achieved beyond 2025. Like I said earlier, we update the model, the actuals, and the assumptions each year to determine what increase, if any, is needed. You may recall that the model last year forecasted that we would need a 3% increase this year. And for the reasons I've mentioned earlier, we've outperformed the model again this year. As a reminder, a gallon of tap water for our average usage residential customer is 0.6 cents. And when you include sanitary sewer service, it's less than 1.6 cents per gallon, water and sewer service for our average customer. So how do we compare with our peers based on their current rates? Well, we're still right in the middle, but we do understand that many of our peers need rate increases and are likely to implement rate increases this year to address some major capital needs that we have been discussing with some of our peers. I usually use this budget session to tell you about all the good things we've accomplished during the year, but this year, addressing the impacts of COVID seemed like a more important use of our time. But before I get on to the final recommendation slide, I want to let you know that we are still doing a really good job with compliance at all 5 of our permitted facilities. And you can see the number of consecutive years in a row for each facility, which is a really big deal. In our world, maintaining that much compliance for that many years is a big deal. And this continues to happen because of your support and our staff's hard work and dedication to their jobs. Okay, on to the final slide. We need time to program and test the billing system with the new rates before going live on July 1st. We also like to use the time between now and July 1st to let our largest customers know about the proposed increase so they can plan for their budgets. Since voting is not typically done during budget work sessions, This is where we see if there's a general consensus that we can begin with that process with the understanding that the final rate approval will occur with the adoptions of the city's FY22 budget. And this same situation applies to any changes that we're making this year to the solid waste charges and the stormwater charges, since all three are on the utility bill, and we need time to program those in and test them before they go out in July. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Robert. I think we have Mayor back. I'm happy to kind of wrap up this session. Okay. Councilmember Buffkin, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. More so a comment. First, I want to acknowledge that in the slides we've seen, there's a lot of pain and suffering going on in the community. People are really struggling. Secondly, the essential nature of this service, having availability of clean water and a good working sewer is something it's easy to take for granted. But look to the situation in Texas recently as an example of the real hardship that happens when this service is not available. So I applaud you, Robert, and your team and all the work you're doing, especially that long-running track record of environmental compliance. You guys are doing great work. And then briefly on the cell phone tower lease issue, I've asked that item be pulled from the consent agenda solely for the chance to have an opportunity tomorrow to celebrate your creativity, your good work, and the really positive impact that'll have for customers that are struggling to pay their bills. I really appreciate y'all taking a look at that and coming up with a good solution that'll help people out. And finally, as to the rate increase, I think this is a modest increase that is needed for the enterprise to keep things going for the future. So lots of good work here, Robert. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, sir.
Councilmember Branch.
Thank you, Robert, for the report and the presentation. My question is around the tiers. I know there was an adjustment we made for COVID. My question is, will there be a post-COVID readjustment? But also, I understand every so often you all adjust those tiers anyway. So what's the timing of that in relations to maybe an adjustment, maybe late next year or later this year?
The Tier 2, Tier 3 threshold adjustment is set to stay in place until after Wake County lifts its state emergency, at least 30 days after Wake County lifts its state of emergency. Typically, our tiers are set with multiple years of data. I'm not certain that a 1 year of pandemic data would give us enough data to reset the tiers, but we usually do that in conjunction with a cost of service study that we do every 5 years. And our last cost of service study was done about 2 years ago. And so we'll be due to redo that in the next year or two to look at that. And by that time, hopefully we will have come out the backside of this pandemic and looking at whatever normal is now and make those new tier adjustments once we know what that looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Council have any other questions or thoughts? Robert, you know I'm a huge fan of y'all's work and really want to give a huge kudos to how quickly y'all responded after we declared a state of emergency on COVID to giving folks some relief on past due bills and reconnecting folks who were disconnected. So just want to thank and recognize your compassion as well. I also agree that a 1.5% increase this year is quite modest, given that we were projected to do a 3% increase. So again, well done on managing our resources and assets. So if council has nothing further, Robert, do you have what you need and we can go to solid waste?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're ready for you, Stan.
All right, fantastic. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. It's good to see you all today. I'm Stan Joseph, the Solid Waste Services Department Director. I want to be mindful of your time, so I'll be brief with some of this information, but please feel free at any time to say, Stan, slow down your PowerPoint. Of course, no one ever says that, but I thought I would offer. I'm here today to do one of my favorite things, which is talk some trash with you all. I want to give an overview of the department and some key accomplishments over the past few years. I'll discuss our base budget needs for FY22, which will help us to stay on the path of maintaining reliable service for our residents. We'll revisit our December conversation regarding our challenges with yard waste. I have some new information for you regarding the community engagement we completed. Then I'd like to review our yard waste proposal with fee options and a tentative timeline to move forward. Finally, I would like to foreshadow what service delivery will look like as we plan to meet the future needs of the city. Next slide, please. You'll recall from previous meetings that our solid waste services in Raleigh, specifically our curbside programs, are truly a premium level of service as compared to other municipalities. In addition to garbage, recycling, and yard waste, we offer residents free bulky grease collection, Christmas tree pickup, shredding events, and electronics recycling. Next slide, please. Madam Mayor, you'll like this one. But wait, there's more. We also provide robust central business district services, monitor and maintain our closed landfill, and respond quickly to cleanup of unforeseen circumstances around the city, like storms, mass gatherings, special events, and illegal dumping. Additionally, our department operates one of the largest yard waste processing facilities in the region. None of this happens without our employees. You know, during my 2020 annual performance evaluation, someone asked me, what are you most proud of this year? I'm not going to say who asked, but let's just say the name rhymes with muffin. And the question caught me a little bit off guard. What can I possibly be proud of in the middle of the worst social, economic, and health crisis I've ever witnessed? But then I reflected on March 25th, 2020, the day we lost one of our own, Adrian Grubbs. Story of a young man, 37 years old, who went from the back of a truck to a leader in our department. 17 years of service to the city, a beautiful wife, 3 children, one of them a little girl who was less than a year old. One day he's laughing in the hallway with us. 2 weeks later, he's gone. There's 500,000 stories out there, no different than this one. But this story was personal to us, and it brought our department to its knees. But our employees did not take a break, could not take a break, or skip a beat from the work they do. Being in front of the homes every day was something that gave our residents hope, made things feel normal. Seeing our city employees, city vehicles, city uniforms, like public safety, solid waste, utilities, transportation, all out there on the front line providing these essential services. It was a comfort for our residents. It meant our city was still functioning. We were not going to break. So, the resiliency and commitment during this extraordinary time, that is what I'm most proud of, our employees. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about a few things we've done together in the past few years. We've not only sustained major headwinds, but we also continue to move forward to position the department for our future. Next slide, please. I remember bringing you the news of the recycling global crisis. China's green fence program was crippling the U.S. recycling industry. Recycling processes began shutting their doors and canceling contracts. This was because the industry was built on a weak business model that was overly dependent on the overseas market. Municipalities literally started suspending their curbside programs across the U.S. Raleigh responded quickly. We moved to negotiate a long-term contract with our processor, Sunoco. We kept our curbside recycling program, and we also negotiated protections for the city from the volatility of this market. The good news is the market is evolving and starting to show positive signs of recovery. The U.S. is using more of its recycling material domestically instead of shipping it overseas. We should have done that a long time ago. Next slide, please. In 2019, I came to you again about our city's solid waste routes. They were antiquated. They had not been balanced in over 10 years. This was causing huge inefficiencies. There were times we would have 3 trucks in the same service area. We were crisscrossing each other daily, and the resulting inefficiencies was leading to service issues for our residents. Council approved the route optimization process in 2019, and we are seeing the return on the investment today. Improved efficiency, enhanced safety, a significant reduction in the level of emissions with our use of fewer trucks, and an improved service delivery to our residents. It is worth mentioning that our routes are more sustainable because they were built to accommodate the future growth in the city. Next slide, please. Then there was the legacy pile. 400,000 cubic yards of backlogged organic material from the past 10 years, stored on-site, piled 3 stories high, and taking up 23 of our 67 usable acres in our yard waste center. Why? Because we were unable to process out the material that we were taking in over the years, and the excess was stored on site. This resulted in a notice of violation issued to the city by the state in 2017. At the end of the day, we were running out of usable space to continue our operations and ran the risk of closing the yard waste center for good. Council approved resources in 2017 for a pilot program to resolve the throughput problem, which it did. We are now able to process and sell all the material we take in. Last week, a contractor started removing our legacy pile. We anticipate the entire pile to be removed in 15 months. Some of the material is being used on site, and the remainder of it is being used for mine reclamation. None of it will be placed in a landfill. The good news is the state has accepted our remediation plan. Moving this legacy pile will free up usable space to plan and focus on the future of compost and biosolids, the first step of which is yard waste carts. Next slide. Our base budget is going to require a 20-cent increase to balance. A lot of this is the continuous increase of our personnel and benefits, which I'm appreciative that we have, on a long-term basis, invested in our employees. Some of it is the cost of our equipment, operations and maintenance, fuel, capital equipment, and also our route management software, which intends to improve our overall service delivery. I'm proud of the work this department has done to be good stewards of tax dollars. We reduced overtime by over 40% in 12 months. We are seeing a return on our investment in the yard waste center and the route optimization. Our employees found innovative ways to do more with less as we carried a 25% vacancy. But the truth is, we've never properly been funded to provide our services at the level our residents have grown to expect. In effect, we had a level of resources that has not always met the service level expectation demand. What we do have is an amazing team of committed employees who does everything they can to meet the expectations of our residents. This budget process offers us the opportunity to do some right-sizing of our fee structure and devote much-needed resources to better cover our costs and maintain the reliability of our services. Next slide, please. The good news is at the same time we can introduce an enhanced level of yard waste service with rollout carts, which is a major convenience for our residents. It will allow us to operate safer and more efficiently to ensure the service stays reliable, even during unplanned events like storms and COVID. Next slide, please. I've covered some of this information when I briefed you in December. Yard waste collection is labor-intensive, unpredictable, and a challenge to maintain. The resulting unreliability can be extremely frustrating for our residents, and rightfully so. Last year alone, our employees collected over 14,000 tons of material, most of which had to be manually lifted and placed into our trucks. I feel it's important to spend a few minutes explaining why. Why is this such a difficult service to maintain? Next slide, please. Let's start with safety. Lifting injuries are extremely high for yard waste employees, much higher than other lines of business. Bag materials, bundles, and customer-owned containers weigh an average of 75 pounds, and when they're wet, they're easily over 100 pounds. Moving and lifting these containers can place our employees and customers at risk. Also, each plastic bag must be manually torn open to avoid contaminating the yard waste material. This requires employees to stand behind equipment on busy roadways for extended period of times. This is risky. Next is the seasonality of yard waste. At certain times of the year, weather events accelerate the rate of fall and volume significantly. Winter brings higher volumes, but shorter days to collect it. We go into one neighborhood, and we are out in 10 minutes, while others may take a couple hours to collect. Moving equipment and personnel around to meet the need often requires us to keep employees out as it starts getting dark. As we bring in the crews for safety reasons, there are times the routes are not completed. Then there is loose leaf collection. Our transportation department does an amazing job with very difficult service. But like solid waste, they have similar challenges with the sheer volume of material and the weather. Customers often bag their leaves and place them at the curb as an alternative to waiting for the leaf crews. The additional bags are collected by solid waste services. This additional volume slows the collection process, which again ultimately leads to delays and unreliable collection schedules. Then there's limitations. The lack of limitations for material at the curb is unsustainable. On any given day, our crews may run into homes that take 20 minutes to collect. If we spend 20 minutes collecting one home and our drivers have 800 homes per day, it becomes virtually impossible to finish the routes. Finally, there is the environmental impact. Even the best screening systems don't remove all the plastic pieces in the yard waste material. This ends up devaluing the products we sell to the public. More concerning is the plastic ending up in the organic material applied in our gardens and yards. As Americans, we use 100 billion plastic bags each year, but only 1% of those are recycled. We learned some tough lessons during the pandemic. First, we learned our current yard waste service model is extremely fragile and very vulnerable to events like this, a pandemic. Second, when we suspended the service, it really highlighted the importance of reliable collection of this service for our residents. After our presentation in December and following Council's direction, staff embarked on some intensive community engagement to gather input from residents. Next slide, please. We conducted a community survey, hosted focus groups, and continued to benchmark best practices in and out of North Carolina. Our online survey, which had an option to take by phone, received over 1,200 responses, which is extremely good. The survey could be taken online via SurveyMonkey or by calling a city staff member. It was offered in English and Spanish. Staff also conducted 4 focus groups, 2 during the day and 2 during the evening. Focus groups and surveys were advertised on city websites, social media, and pushed out with our monthly utility bill inserts. Next slide, please. These are some of the responses we received from our survey by zip code. Next slide, please. I thought this was interesting. There was a very tight margin between the ideas of maintaining our current level of biweekly service and potentially returning to weekly service utilizing 96-gallon carts. Many residents seem to get accustomed to the current service level and feel like it met their needs. When we closed the surveys, weekly service with 96-gallon containers had the slight edge of 52% to 48%. Next slide, please. While participation in the focus groups were not as high as we would have liked, we did receive a lot of positive feedback and fielded a lot of good questions. The questions focused around bag limits and distribution of cart process. Overall, residents seem interested and appreciated staff's efforts to improve the service. Next slide, please. We continued our look across the state at other municipalities. Not much change since I last briefed you in December. Some of the key takeaways, again, were that curbside yard waste is mostly being serviced with city carts. Many municipalities have limitations, and a few have separate fees for the service that averages around $5 a month. Municipalities who currently do not have carts are exploring ways to move in that direction. Wendell, for example, recently made the move, and the residents seem to love that service. Cary and Charlotte are both taking this option to council during this year's budget session. Again, municipalities who did not have rollout carts during the pandemic were initially forced to suspend their yard waste service. Next slide, please. Our proposal to enhance yard waste servicing revolves around three key changes. Number one, distribute 96-gallon rollout carts to collect yard waste. This is not only going to increase capacity and convenience for our customers, it greatly reduces the risk of injury and automates the process. Number two, use only compostable non-plastic bags for additional material. Also beneficial for safety and efficiency, but also reduces the negative environmental impacts of plastic bags. And number three, establish seasonal limits for compostable bags. This stabilizes our volume and improves seasonal predictability. Our proposal would require a fee increase to support the costs associated with purchasing the carts and additional resources for staff and equipment. Next slide, please. Our option A would be a return to weekly service with carts. This would require an increase of $1.10 per month. With the 20-cent base budget addition, the total increase would be $1.30 per month. Our option B would maintain biweekly service and add carts. This would require an increase of 80 cents per month. With the 20-cent base budget addition, the total increase would be $1 even per month. Next slide, please. With an approval from Council today, this would be a tentative timeline to bring the yard waste enhancements online. Developing a robust and detailed communication plan for this spring would be our top priority. Cart procurement and distribution would begin in the fall and go through the winter, and we would plan to go live in the spring of 2022. Next slide, please. As we look to the future, we plan to maximize our service delivery to residents, but minimize our footprint while doing so. We've seen our return on our investments in efficiency with the reduction of trucks, miles, fuel, and emissions. This department has an aggressive goal of converting 25% of our solid waste fleet to compressed natural gas by the year 2025. We are also exploring grant opportunities to pilot electric and hybrid solid waste vehicles. We've also formed a strong alliance with groups like the Triangle Region Solid Waste Alliance and Wake County Technical Advisory Committee. This is in collaboration with the TJCOG. Collectively, we leverage our numbers to explore long-term and sustainable prospects for solid waste and recycling for all of us in the region. We discuss things like regional material recovery facilities, waste to energy, and biosolid technology. Finally, we will kick off our circular economy initiative along with our department sub-branding this year. We plan to educate and build consensus to divert from landfills and driving towards maximizing reuse in the city. Next slide, please. Our next steps would be to propose the budget with these recommended changes and fee increase on May 18, 2021. We would keep council updated on the progress throughout fiscal year 2022. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time, and I am happy to answer any questions you might have.
Councilmember Cox.
I was just going to say thanks for talking trash with us, Stan. It's always a pleasure. And I think we've seen a number of residents express their frustration with yard waste program. I think it will be worth the investment for Plan A to move forward with that.
So can I go?
Nicole, you want me to jump in now, or you want me to jump in, or you want to keep going?
You got it.
Councilor Cox had his hand raised.
I was wondering about the carts. They're 96 gallons. What does that, in terms of the number of bags, what's that equivalent to?
So I think that, a lot of our residents currently have those customer-owned containers. The capacity in there is probably between 30 and 40 gallon capacity. So it would just about triple the capacity of a customer-owned container. I do know that the compostable bags typically hold more than the plastic bags, maybe 1.5 times the amount. And so that would also add additional capacity.
Okay, so just some observations. I actually have a fairly small yard, about 1/4 acre, and but I got lots of trees. And so it's common for me to put 15 bags out on the curb for pickup. And in the fall, I could do that easily once a week. And so even with the cart, which would be the equivalent of 2 or 3 of bags, I would still be looking at putting another dozen bags out on the street. So am I limited just to the cart, or can I put more bags on the curb?
Yes, so you would not be limited to just the carts. I think what we're looking at is seasonal flexibility on the bags. But our initial recommendation would be to have off-season 10 bags and on-season being the time when transportation is picking up leaves in the fall to be at a 15-bag limit.
And you're saying that would be for 1 week or for 2 weeks? Every 2 weeks?
Well, I think that the 2 options include weekly with carts and biweekly with the carts, and I think that's going to be a decision that council will have to make.
Okay. And for homeowners like myself that really don't have extra room for more carts, do we have the option of not taking a cart?
The option to opt out of the carts is definitely there. You don't have to have a yard waste cart. I think that the footprint of a 96-gallon cart is actually smaller than 2 or 3 35-gallon container carts that our residents currently use. But the option to opt out is there, but the residents will still be asked to pay the fee.
Well, with the bags, what I do is I bag my leaves and I leave the bags under the trees until the day of collection. And so they're out of the way, and usually in my backyard or my side yard. I do not really have the room to put an extra cart next to my garage because of a hill. There's a drop off, and I have just a small level area, and then right now I keep my garbage can there and my recycling can there. And I don't really have room for another cart. So I suspect that I'm probably not the only one in the city that has that situation.
Yeah, Councilor Cox, we did receive some of that feedback during our focus groups. I think the feedback seemed to be isolated in certain neighborhoods throughout zip codes. Mm-hmm. I believe that residents will be able to opt out of the cart, and if they so choose actually just to use compostable bags, they can do so. I think it's going to be a level of service that will meet their needs, whatever that is.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Branch.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Stan. My question is, by going to carts, would residents then be able in the fall, with leaf pickup, be able to have their leaves picked up during that yard waste pickup time, if it's weekly or bi-weekly? Would they be able to put their leaves in that and not have to wait until they fall into rotation with our standard leaf pickup?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilor Branch. I think that it's a matter of volume. I think that during the fall, if a resident has enough leaves to fill a 96-gallon container and 15 compostable bags, and that service suffices for them, then that's perfectly fine. I think that if they have excess and they wanted to push it to the curb for the transportation crews to service as well, that service will continue during the fall.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask, because I can see residents, if they know, say it's biweekly, they know every 2 weeks that yard waste is being picked up, then they will adjust and put their leaves in that week. Then the next week, they'll probably give you some more during the next pickup and cycle, instead of having to wait until the end of January to have their leaves picked up like some had to do this year. So that's why I'm trying to ensure that we're in doing this, and we're talking about improving service, because I received the calls because you received the calls this year that I received. So I'm just trying to understand how we can address that situation. Even though it's only during a certain part of the year, it's a major part of our calls.
I think we'll be able to decipher a lot of that during our outreach and communication, and I think we'll continue getting input from residents regarding any proposed change, and work with our transportation crews to make sure that's as seamless as possible.
Okay. And my last question is, if we go yard waste weekly, does that keep their regular trash and recycle to biweekly as they are now? Recycles biweekly, even though trash is every week. But how does that? Because I don't want to get people off schedule.
Yeah. So it depends on what council's pleasure is as far as deciding on weekly or biweekly. If we return to weekly, that's really kind of a non-issue because the carts will come out every week. If we decide on biweekly, we have a couple options here. I think that we can, right now, the yard waste service is aligned with recycling. So you're going to put out your garbage one week, and then the next week you're going to put out your garbage, your recycling, and your yard waste. That's a lot of carts on the curb. So my recommendation would be, if we decide to go biweekly, I would alternate the yard waste so that one week you're putting out garbage and yard waste, and the other week you're putting out garbage and recycling. That way it keeps from so many containers being on the curb. That would be my recommendation. It depends on where we land as far as what option we're going to select.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, then Councilmember Knight.
Thank you. Mr. Joseph, I have a question and then a thought. The first being, and this is something we've talked about in the past, would the yard waste bins allow us to collect compost as well?
So yard waste carts is the first step to collecting compost. So eventually, once we get the yard waste service in line and working, once we clean out our legacy pile in the yard waste center, and we can then start positioning the plant to accommodate food scraps and organic material, at some point in the future, residents will be able to place their organic material or food waste into the yard waste carts, and we'll be able to process it in our yard waste center.
Great, that makes so much sense to me. And then the comment would be, I am all for doing, Mayor, I think you're unmuted and there's some echoing going on. Awesome, thank you. I am all for doing a weekly pickup. I mean, the cost seems to be super nominal, and it sounds like folks are pretty supportive of doing the carts, and then maybe we should let you handle logistics and roll out on all this. You have shown your worth on doing such things on all sorts of different issues in your department. And so I just want to say, I trust you to get it done, and I'm in favor of the every week option.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I would echo what the Mayor Pro Tem just said. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Joseph, thank you for this presentation. I think it's very useful and helpful. I know y'all have had a very challenging year, and I appreciate y'all's continued professionalism. And, you know, y'all are the face of the city in a lot of ways to the community, and we appreciate all the hard work that y'all have done and made through this last trying year. So I appreciate that. I want to just touch on your slide on getting ready for the future. And I appreciate you including that in this presentation. I hope y'all do explore electric vehicles, and if we could move to that as quickly as possible as part of the city's fleet, that would be awesome. And I really support y'all in that. The idea of incentivizing or looking at how to help our citizens and residents use less waste, create less waste, both yard and inside their house. I appreciate you looking at that with this, you know, incorporating the circular economy, because I think that's very important. As we don't know the future of the global and national recycling market. We certainly, you know, we have not enough space to continue to take in as much as we have in the past, in both yard waste and the other waste. So I appreciate that, and thinking about how to educate our citizens and residents, and working towards just creating less waste for all of us, and being part of that solution. So I thank y'all for doing that. Look forward to working with y'all on ideas of how to do that in the future. So thanks for all y'all's continued hard work.
Thank you, Councilor Knight. And the beard looks great.
Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo the other comments in appreciation of the work y'all do, Stan. And it has been a really tough year, and I acknowledge that. And I hope your employees feel the support and appreciation from this council. I think you answered this question, but I just want to make sure, because this is a valued service. And are we doing any changes to loose leaf service?
Currently, we are not. I think we had a good loose leaf collection year. I believe that, you know, a few years back, transportation brought the council various options as to if we wanted to do things like add more equipment or add another pass. And at that time, council, I think rightfully so, chose not to. So currently, we're sitting on what we viewed as a really good leaf season, and things are looking good. There's been a few adjustments that transportation has made that seem to have kind of streamlined some of the processes, and continue to work on that for next year.
Councilmember Melton.
I just want to thank you for your work. I'm excited about this approach. Looking ahead, I want to echo Councilmember Stewart's question about the curbside composting. If we can get that off the ground, I think that's a big goal to work towards, because I know many members of our community will really appreciate it. But I think this is a good service shift. I would support the weekly collection, which I think has been mentioned a couple of times, because the cost is nominal. Though I will point out that will mess up your how many carts at the curb rotation. Though I'm sure that's something that the experts can handle. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Councilmember Fort.
I was listening to Mr. Joseph, and I would say that Councilmember Melton, I have to disagree with you on some of our older communities where the driveways and mailboxes are kind of close. 3 carts would be a lot, and in certain areas you'd almost have people infringing on each other's property space with that many carts out at one time. So I support Mr. Joseph's recommendation to do bi-weekly collection, only because some of our areas have more space, but some of them do not. And I think that would, you know, in terms of trying to get all the trucks there, get all the carts, having 3 out at one time would just be a little much in a lot of the areas in Raleigh, especially some of the older neighborhoods.
Councilmember Branch.
Yes, thank you. I just had a follow-up question, and it's around the carts and rotation. I actually like recommendation 2 of bi-weekly, and it has to do with my question: do you have the staff to do a weekly yard waste, because if we have a weekly yard waste, you're going to have a week where you're going to have recycle trucks running, yard waste trucks running, as well as trash trucks running. And I know the cost there, you know, is they're close now, but in thinking of longevity, you know, that's one of my concerns, as well as Councilor Ford said, we have communities that if you put 3 carts out, and sometimes when the carts are put back down, they don't always get placed directly back on the curb. You know, that's another major concern. But so that's why I like the bi-weekly, but I want to address the staffing to, as far as you can, or city manager, the staffing for running 3 trucks in neighborhoods, you know, on a weekly basis, during those weeks where you have all 3 services.
Yeah, so I think, you know, our staffing is, if we go return to weekly, I think folks are kind of used to the biweekly yard waste service right now. I think in a return to weekly service, we definitely would have to increase our staffing. I think part of the reason we did that is because of the separation of our employees for COVID, where we had to run 1 truck behind. Those costs, that does give us less capacity to be out there every week. But we did plan in this year's, for at least this year's budget, to cover those costs should council decide to go with weekly. I don't know if that answered your question or not. I mean, it definitely would take more staffing and resources to go weekly than biweekly.
So you answered my question. I think my fellow council members hear my concern at the same time. And then Councilor Ford, her points are very valid based on the way our neighborhoods are being built and designed.
Councilmember Cox.
But considering we're not out of the woods yet with COVID-19, obviously there's still going to be social distancing requirements. And so I would like to suggest that we just continue the bi-weekly for the time being, and then maybe revisit this at a later date.
I would suggest that we ask staff to go back and come back with a final recommendation with some of the pros and cons.
We can do that.
And use your, you know what you're doing, Stan. So keep talking trash and get it done. Councilmember Knight.
I just want to be clear. I'm hoping that we're going to keep the enhancements that Mr. Joseph has talked about. The question, I hope, comes down to, do we do it weekly or bi-weekly?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. That's it. And I think we do. I would suggest doing whatever staff and Mr. Joseph advises us to do.
Yep.
Yes, that's correct. And I'm happy to offer my opinion on a recommendation at this time.
Go.
Okay. So my recommendation would be for biweekly. And the reason I would recommend that is, there's numerous reasons. Number one is that I feel that our customers are used to it right now. We went through the past 12 months with it, and capacity seems to be okay. We've been tracking the volume. Our leaf collection service went fine. It also does position us in a place, should we have a second surge of the pandemic or something different, that we're already postured where we can back off and create the social distancing immediately versus having to, again, adjust back from weekly to biweekly. I think that it minimizes the increase to our residents. I do think that, it is nominal amount to get weekly, but every little bit counts right now for our folks. And so that lower amount is certainly a cost savings for them. I think the big thing for me is the fact that we travel about 50% less miles, and we reduce our carbon emissions by about 42%. we're not in those neighborhoods weekly anymore with our trucks. We're there every other week, so it's less chance of accidents, less chance of at risk for our drivers. But the big thing is we're just not burning as much fuel. We're not traveling as much miles. Also, biweekly gives us capacity to flex because our routes are a little bit shorter because we essentially took one and split it. We went from probably 11-hour routes to maybe 7 or 8-hour routes. It affords us some capacity for inclement weather, or if we have to send our folks to go help in garbage or recycling and those sort of things. So in my opinion, I feel that the biweekly would be the most prudent option at this time, but obviously that's just my opinion. So.
Okay. I think you've got your marching orders.
We'll see the bi-weekly report on the 18th, I take it, Madam Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Now, quit the trash talking. Next. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Stan just
That's
brings
okay.
out the best in me.
Thank you all very much. It's good to see all of you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of City Council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you today to present the Stormwater Management Program's fiscal year 22 budget. My name is Wayne Miles. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager in the Engineering Services Division. My agenda today to present first our stormwater mission and vision, a slight recap from the presentation we made to you back in November. I'll then move to talk about our fiscal year 22 base budget plan, and then on to several level of service options and fee rate options that staff has worked with the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission to provide for your feedback and consideration. I'll talk a little bit about financing options. That was a question that came up at the presentation in November, and then welcome any discussion, questions, and feedback. First, a quick review of the Stormwater Program's mission. Our mission is to manage stormwater to preserve and protect life, support healthy natural resources, and complement sustainable growth for the community. We are guided by the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission, affectionately known as SMAC, a 10-member group of volunteers appointed by City Council to help stormwater staff set priorities, guide on budget rankings, and guide us on policy decisions. And they meet monthly, and we've been meeting virtually since July. So we really appreciate the input and guidance that we have received from SMAC. And as we presented back in November, our program vision is to be the smartest stormwater program possible to economically and equitably achieve our mission. In short, to be stormwater smart. And we're working very hard across all of the program elements that support our mission to apply the Be Stormwater Smart philosophy. And there are many, and I reviewed many of those in November, so I won't go through the details again. But I'm very proud of our program and our staff. They've been working very hard through some challenging conditions over the past year and have really come through. A few highlights of the accomplishments related to the capital improvement program. Last year was the highest output to date, delivering over $14 million of capital improvements projects, a wide range of improvements for the community. And compare that $14 million to our CIP budget this year is $6.5 million. So as you can see, our team continues to deliver a number of the legacy projects that had been funded in previous years and getting those projects delivered to the community. We've worked hard on a number of policies and programs that you're familiar with, I know. Improving floodplain management regulations. The Planning Commission, I believe, will be bringing those back to you with a recommendation next month. We've revised our lake management evaluation program to give more flexibility. And the first test case of that program will be coming to you in the next month at the Upper Durant Lake Nature Preserve project. And then lastly, the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan efforts, SMAC, and their GSI committee has been working very hard to develop that plan, and you can expect to see that sometime in May as well. And then, as I'd mentioned, in services, I'm very proud of our team. We've continued to deliver through the pandemic, even to the point of some of our programs. For example, the plan review staff have increased their productivity in the numbers of plan reviews and on-time reviews through the pandemic, even working at home. We've also had a division reorganization that started this January that did not change the number of positions in our division, but reallocated resources, I think, to help us be much more efficient. We've combined our infrastructure group and our drainage assistance group to pool our project managers so that they can support each other and be more flexible in the types of programs we're delivering. We've moved positions to focus more on asset management, especially in our dam and stormwater control measure inspection positions to improve our inspections and condition assessment of those facilities. We've designated a new flood early warning engineer position to help focus on public safety and coordinate all of the efforts that we are focusing on to help communicate public risk related to flooding and coordinate with emergency management, RPD, and the fire department and other departments to help keep our public safe. And we've developed a new project controls administrator position that is piloting in the stormwater division, but will be rolled out across the department to help the CIP delivery process be much more effective and efficient and standardized. Our base budget that we have proposed at this point is based on no fee increase and no change in staff positions. Right now, we have 120 positions funded in the stormwater program. 66 of those are in engineering services, and 54 are in transportation under the Transportation Field Services Stormwater Maintenance Group. And our current single-family equivalent unit fee rate is $5.50 per month. That generates approximately $25.6 million in revenues and has would result in a CIP budget of about $6.5 million. And that's essentially the same budget that we are operating under this year. And you can see the programs that are laid out on this chart. Major infrastructure remains about the same, drainage assistance, asset management, and the overall CIP is about $6.5 million under this scenario as it is this year. I would like to present three additional level of service options that, as I said, SMAC has helped us develop for your further consideration. And first, I'd like to review our budgets over a number of the past years and show those in relation to the base budget and the three level of service options. So each of these bar graphs is broken into stages. The lower bar is operations over the years. The upper bar is capital improvements. And then the smaller bars in the middle is the fund balance restoration. I've talked to you a little bit about that in the past. That's our carrying cash, which our policy is 90 days or 25% of our annual revenue of fund balances. It's been our fiscal policy to date. We had used some of that for unexpected expenses in past years, but we have built that back up and continue to work to do so. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in later slides as well. So the The green box to the right has the 4 options that we welcome your feedback. The base budget with no increase would generate the same amount of revenues and essentially be the same budget this year. There are 3 additional options that I would like to suggest to you, and they correspond to 50-cent rate increase, a $1 rate increase, and a $1.50 rate increase. And I'll go into a little bit more details of what each of those relates to in terms of service and program delivery. First, focusing on the CIP. So you see on the right-hand side, again, 4 bars related to each level of service. The fiscal year 22 zero base budget would be $6.5 million. And then the 3 additional level of services would correspond to 7.2, 8.9, and $10.4 million corresponding. And you can see as that compares to our CIP budgets in past years. We've continued to work hard to update our backlog projections in terms of known project needs related to stormwater in our major categories. And right now, that total backlog is approximately $746 million, which is higher than last year. And that is in part because aging infrastructure continues to decay, but much of that is just because we have a better understanding of what our backlog needs really are based on it. Continued work on our asset management program, continued work related to investigating complaints and other program areas. So the first level of service 1, which corresponds to a 50-cent rate adjustment, would include 5 proposed positions in engineering services. That would be 2 additional stormwater plan reviewers, 2 asset management engineers, and 1 financial utility operations position. And then in addition, 5 new stormwater positions in the transportation field services maintenance group, 4 maintenance staff to help make our existing equipment more efficient and effective in terms of its production, and a data analyst to support our closed circuit television inspection program. This would bring us to 130 full-time employees between engineering services and transportation. This would fund similar programs to the base budget with slight modifications in terms of the overall funding level for each of these, which would raise the CIP to $7.2 million per year. Level of service 2, for your consideration, corresponds to a $1 rate increase. This does not change our operating budget at all, but would provide additional funding into the CIP. And here's the program areas that we would propose to expand related to this level of service option. As you can see on the far right-hand column, there are 3 program areas that this option would allow us to provide additional funding. First, the flood hazard mitigation program, which we have funded in the past, but have not recently funded that. That provides funding for voluntary buyouts in flood-prone areas. A stream stabilization program, which would be a new program, which would help support many of the projects that we know about that are either in the drainage assistance program or our streams program, but have not been able to fund in the past. And then the third new program is our Green Stormwater Infrastructure Program. This funding would provide additional funding for city projects to add green stormwater infrastructure on projects we are already implementing, where many of those projects do not need stormwater controls, especially if it's redevelopment in a highly impervious area. And it would also allow us to provide additional GSI above and beyond where stormwater control requirements are met. And then lastly, option 3, which corresponds to a $1.50 rate adjustment. Again, no positions in engineering services, but we would propose to add 2 new positions in the stormwater maintenance group. This would be for an additional closed circuit television inspection crew and equipment that would step up our aging infrastructure inspection program even further and allow us to catch up on our understanding of the risk levels associated with that aging infrastructure more quickly. And this would bring us to 132 full-time staff. And this level of option, again, would allow us to add the 3 programs I mentioned at a modestly higher rate, the flood hazard mitigation, stream stabilization, and GSI programs for a total CIP of $10.4 million. The Stormwater Management Advisory Commission at their meeting earlier this month did weigh in on these level of service options. They did endorse option 3, which corresponds to the $1.50 rate increase by a vote of 8-1. I would like to note that the one member who voted against level of service 3 preferred level of service 1 and cited in particular concerns about impacts to nonprofits from the higher level of service and rate increase. Here's where our fees right now compare to our peers who have stormwater utilities. The lighter blue bars are North Carolina communities who have stormwater utilities, and we're about in the middle of the pack overall in that peer group. Other peers that are listed on here are capital cities in the southeast who have stormwater utilities, and in that peer group we are slightly below the peers that we're comparing to, for example, Nashville, Richmond, Tallahassee, Austin, and Columbia, South Carolina. And then you can see with the dashed bars, those are where our relative 3 level of service increases would put Raleigh is compared to these other peer cities. Moving on to financing options, and this was a question that came up back in November as to options that we could address that stormwater CIP backlog with bonds, potentially. Revenue or general obligation bonds are both feasible options to look at. And we've had several discussions with our budget office, with our finance department, looking at these. And I think one of the takeaways from those discussions is bond financing would take some planning and preparation in order to get a good bond rating. I've talked about that policy that we have had of 25% or 90 days of cash or fund balance. In order to get a good bond rating, we would need to increase that amount probably to at least 6 months. For comparison, you saw Mr. Massengill says that Raleigh Water has over 1 year of fund balance, cash on hand, to get their AAA rating. So that's something that we would need to look at what our objectives were. We may not need to go all the way to AAA, but would like to get higher than we would right now. State revolving fund under the Clean Water Program is another option that we're looking at. Stormwater projects are eligible, although the priority points awarded on those projects, and this is a competitive program, do lend themselves more to wastewater-related projects. But that's something that we do have a couple of projects that we believe would score well and be competitive, and we're looking hard at that. And then lastly, there has been some discussion of environmental impact bonds as an option to look at stormwater financing. Our initial read on that is that where those have been used in other areas of the country, it's really to meet large EPA-related consent decree programs that have a high risk of regulatory compliance. And for example, where green stormwater infrastructure is used to meet those regulatory requirements, there may be some risk that GSI would not achieve the compliance levels needed in those programs. We're lucky in that we don't have that type of regulatory compliance consent decree program, so we don't have that kind of risk. And so we don't need a financing agency to take that risk from us if GSI does not meet our needs, because we're implementing GSI because we believe it's the right thing to do, not necessarily because it's a regulatory requirement. So let me close by saying we very much appreciate the support that City Council provides to the stormwater program. And with your feedback and guidance, we look forward to implementing our vision to become the smartest stormwater program we can. I'd be glad to take any questions or feedback or comments from the council at this time. Thank you.
Councilmember Melton and then Stewart.
Thank you. I was just looking at the fee comparison chart, and I do think it's apparent that we do have some catching up to do. And this is not an area where I pretend to know a lot or I'm an expert, and I sort of lean on other council members who have more experience here. But it does seem like with a city like ours, that we are very fortunate folks continue to want to grow and invest here. And as we continue to build a denser, more walkable community, we also have to make sure that these types of resources are keeping up with the growth and demand. So I'm appreciative of the presentation.
Mr. Miles, I am really grateful for the work you and your department do, and am quite excited about the Stormwater Smart program you've laid out. And I personally feel like we need to go with SMAC's recommendation of a $1.50 increase. I know it's a lot, but if we really want to invest in this work and think about climate resilience and how we're going to do better at managing stormwater in the future, I think that's the best option at this time.
We had Councilmember Knight, then Branch, then Buffkin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I agree with the comments just made by Councilor Melton and Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. And I would actually argue it's not a lot if looking relatively across the board of what other cities have done and are doing and the needs that we have. And if you look at our stormwater CIP in the last 5 years, it's decreased and noticeably decreased. And I think we need to stop that. We have incredible amount of needs. We're way behind. And so I agree with them that I think we support SMAC's recommendation to go with option number 3. And I think it's timely. I think it's defensible. And I think it needs to happen. So I appreciate y'all's continued work, Mr. Miles, and look forward to working with y'all as we continue to improve our stormwater system. Thank you.
Councilmember Buffkin, then Branch.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Miles, for being with us in your presentation today. This is an area where, frankly, the status quo is just unacceptable to me. As Mr. Knight noted, when you see the need increasing while the budget and resources available to address it are decreasing and a backlog of over 100 years, we've got to take some action on this. I would support SMAC's recommendation, and also I'd be willing to go higher. And on the financing options, I'd like to see us pursue all of these, except to the extent the staff has a strong recommendation for one over the other. I understand and appreciate the need to be focused in our efforts. But I think we need to pursue all of these. These are long-term assets. They should be financed. The pay-go model is not working for our community. And as we consider this increase, I hope we will bear in mind the people who are really suffering under these conditions, folks who are literally losing their backyard. Some of them are having their basement or living room flooded every time there's a hard rain. And that is not a criticism of your staff and your management of the program. This is the legacy of a lot of past decisions that have now really come to a head here for us. And I'm excited about the proposals you brought to us, and I want to go full speed ahead on getting these projects done and getting that backlog cleared out.
Thank you, Wayne, for the work and the information. Trust me, as much as we talk and emails going back and forth, I understand the needs of funding stormwater and making sure that we address the backlog. I also am looking at the chart and the graph, and I understand the difference between 10 years and 20 years when you look at the big jump. And I have to, in my desires and push to do more faster, I also have to remember those that have to pay the bills. And thinking about those that have to pay the bills and address those usually are the ones that are the most impacted by stormwater. So it's a double-edged sword. I have to push for option 2. For that fact, I think everything does add up. And when I look at the difference in backlog years, that 10-year gap, is there, but I know we're going to be right back at this 12 months from now with another proposal and trying to figure out the balance. And then knowing that I have to push for option 2 and voice for option 2 only because of the concerns of those that have to pay for the services.
Councilmember Cox, then Knight, then Buffkin.
Do we have different classes of customers for stormwater the way we do with water and sewer? And is that an option?
The answer is no, sir. The way the stormwater utility fee is set up based on the enabling legislation that we have is that all classes are the same based on the amount of impervious area that is on the property. And the only difference between classes is the residential fees are in tiers, which are 5 set tiers based on the sizes, whereas the commercial category is a straight calculation, the amount of impervious area divided by 2,260 square feet, which is our base unit, our single family equivalent unit, and then their fee is a multiple of that. But it is all proportionate to impervious area. And that's the way that the enabling legislation that we work under allows that to be set up.
Could we get those details, something that describes this on paper?
Be glad to provide that information to you, sir.
Thank you.
If I'm next, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to, I forgot to mention this earlier, so I'm sorry I'm jumping back in, but I also support looking at all the financing options available. I think this is a progressive, viable way to help pay for these large projects. Other cities are using these methods. We need to use all the tools that are available to us. So I support that as well, including the environmental impact bonds, which are sort of maybe a newer way of looking at funding. But I think that's something that should be investigated further and researched. But I appreciate y'all bringing forward these options and support y'all looking at these as ways of helping to pay for all of our stormwater issues. Thank you.
Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. My question was asked by Mr. Cox, and I'll wait until we receive our follow-up information.
Councilmember Fort.
Mr. Miles, thank you for the presentation. And you and I have spent some time out in the community with some residents. And I see that smile on your face because you may remember something that a constituent said to me that, at this point they would put bonds on the ballot to take care of the stormwater problems because it's become just that burdensome to the residents and the citizens in the community. So again, thank you for the options that you've put forward. And I know that for a lot of our citizens, as we deal with other matters, stormwater is a tremendous concern to our community. So I appreciate the hard work of you and your staff.
Any other comments? Just my 2 cents. We have had endless discussions about stormwater and challenges. And, we did not do what we needed to do last time around because of COVID, and that was a wise choice. But we need to make this investment, so I'm all in. And so I hope that you've gotten the information that you need and the feedback you need to move forward. And we'll be hearing more.
Thank you very much for the support.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. So our last item on the agenda is an update on our other enterprise funds. In an effort to save a little bit of time, we've combined 3 of our somewhat smaller enterprises into one presentation for you this afternoon. So today, I'm going to provide an overview of where we are in the fiscal year 22 budget process in relation to the Raleigh Convention Center and Performing Arts Complex, Raleigh Parking, and our transit enterprise. The Raleigh Convention Center complex has been working diligently over the past fiscal year to control cost as revenues have been impacted due to the pandemic. RCC is anticipating slow growth for event-related revenue as events are anticipated to come back at a reduced capacity. As a result, the fiscal year 22 budget assumes 50% event income related income. While this is a conservative estimate, many factors could impact this schedule, and it puts RCC in a manageable financial position. Based on this revenue estimate and our known expenses, RCC would utilize $5.8 million in fund balance appropriation for fiscal year 22. As part of the fiscal year 21 budget process, we presented planned increases for room rentals at the convention center. These fees have not been revised for many years until last year. Fiscal year 22 is the second year of the 2-year planned increases. Moving on to our parking fund. Raleigh Parking has also been working diligently over the past fiscal year to control costs as revenues have been impacted due to the pandemic. Revenue losses include special event parking, on-street parking, and monthly parking. For the fiscal year 22 budget, parking is anticipating a $5.2 million reduction in revenues. While most of parking's expenses are fixed costs, they have been able to reduce some expenses. For example, parking is not proposing any capital funding and has also identified an additional $1 million in operating reductions. With limited to zero fund balance available in fiscal year 22, parking will require a $4 million subsidy to balance their fiscal year 22 budget. The Wake Transit Plan represents a critical partnership with our regional partners to fund investments in transit. The plan is primarily funded through a half-cent sales tax collected through Wake County. As a result of continued sales tax growth in fiscal year 21, there is minimal impact to Wake Transit operations. Fiscal year 22 programmed Wake Transit projects include the continued implementation of the bus rapid transit route, which includes the design for Western Boulevard. Funding is programmed for continued investments in shelter improvements and ADA facility improvements. Go Raleigh continues to provide critical transportation options for members of our community, and staff has worked to maintain CDC recommended safety protocols within the system throughout the pandemic. The fiscal year 22 budget continues the general fund $21.1 million investment in transit. The budget also anticipates resuming fares beginning January 1st, 2022. To continue to cover net deficits, the city has programmed CARES Act funding for fiscal year 22. And that was a lot of information very quickly, but we do have staff here, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have on our other enterprise funds.
Councilmember Melton.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions, but first I want to say that I am very glad to see that we don't anticipate any impact to the Wake transit plan, especially implementation of bus rapid transit, and installing the improvements at our bus stops and the ADA improvements. I think that's really important work and it needs to continue with priority. I have two questions about enterprise funds with parking. Just for my own education, what are our costs? Like you said, there's gonna be a $4 million gap. Like what costs do we have associated with parking? Then the other question I have is regarding the fare charges for transit. You know, our budget runs July 1 through June 30th. And so the fares resuming January 1, 2022 is going to be middle of a budget cycle. Like, are we able to just put off that resuming the fares until like the next budget? Like it would be, you know, July 1st, 2022 instead of January. Like, do we have that capacity? Those are the two questions I have. Because I think there's a policy determination there too, right? I mean, if in the future we're going to look at reduced or fare-free transit, that's going to be a budget determination, and that would be a future, you know, budget.
So I've got Matt here with parking who can answer the first question about expenses in terms of some more specifics.
Good afternoon, Council. Matt Courier, Parking Manager. To Mary's point, the majority of our expenses are fixed. Specifically, we have well over $6 million in debt service annually on our parking decks. There's also a large contract for our off-street services. Those are managed by a third party who does that, and that expense is, you know, getting close to $2 million a year. Cleaning of the parking decks, and then it's the contractual services that we have to continue to allow for payments on the on-street meters, mobile pay, and the other large contractual services that we have.
In terms of the second question associated with transit, I mean, I think it would be up to council from a policy perspective of a direction you want us to do in terms of whether you want us to find the resources through CARES or somewhere else to fund that second half of the year with transit.
Councilor Melton, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I would like, look, I'm not trying to kick up a bunch of controversy right now, and we can have the fare-free transit or whatever the fare looks like transit discussion at a future budget, but I certainly do not think that in the middle of a budget cycle, we should resume collecting fares, especially if we have got some CARES Act funding that can take care of it. My preference would be that if fares are going to resume, they resume concurrent with a new budget. And so we're passing the budget for 21-22 in this July. So I would think that instead of January 1, 2022, it should be at least July 1, 2022, if a future council, us or someone doesn't make a determination for that budget.
Councilmember Branch, just don't talk about transit investments versus transit fares, okay?
I won't today. For those who weren't at the retreat, you missed that long conversation. What I was going to say too, I want everyone to keep in mind that Go Raleigh will at some point in the few months send out RFPs for our transit management company. And that decision will be made sometime in the fall. And if we continue with the same or pick someone different, whomever, that new contract starts in January. So I believe that's why they picked January. So I just wanted to offer that information.
Okay, any additional comments or questions? Councilmember Knight?
Possibly staff could come back with an estimate for the CARES Act funding, if there's a way that it could also cover the rest of the whole budget cycle or whole budget year in terms of fares, or just what are there other options in terms of covering that cost for the rest of the budget, as I think Mr. Melton is interested in. I'd be interested in finding that out myself. Thank you.
We can do that.
You know, I think as we discussed the other day too, this might be one of those equity issues that we really want to give a lot of thought to. So, Councilmember Branch.
Yeah, can I just make a request that at some future work session where we hear from staff about the financing of transit, because there's federal dollars that I know are implemented, and there's certain things that we have to do in order to receive those federal dollars. So I think if everyone had that information, we can start making, a lot more sounded, decisions overall on the future direction.
Will do.
Okay. Is that the end of the presentations for today?
Yes,
Mary?
ma'am, it is.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from council? Okay, well, then I am going to adjourn this budget work session. We will see you all tomorrow at our next work session at 11:30. We will have spent, let's see, just about 5 days together now. So, yeah, in a row. So thank you all for your dedication and your time. And we'll see you at 11:30 tomorrow and then 1 o'clock for our council meeting. Thank you so much.